The morning frost clung to Sarah Bennet's boots as she made her way down the narrow mountain path, her basket of dried herbs rattling softly with each careful step. Pine Valley stretched below her like a green wound carved between the towering peaks of the Blue Ridge Mountains, its scattered homesteads barely visible through the morning mist. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah had been walking these paths since childhood, learning from her grandmother which plants could heal and which could harm. At 23, she was the closest thing Pine Valley had to a doctor, though she'd never set foot in a medical school. The basket on her arm contained feverfew for the Johnson baby's cough and willow bark for old Mr. Patterson's joints, remedies that had served the valley folk for generations. The late autumn of 1842 had been particularly harsh. Early snows had trapped many families in their homes, and supplies were running dangerously low throughout the valley. Sarah's own cabin, perched halfway up the eastern slope, held barely enough preserved food to last through winter. She'd been rationing her stores carefully, knowing that once the heavy snows came, there would be no leaving the valley until spring. As she rounded a bend in the path, something caught her eye. A dark shape lay crumpled against the base of an ancient oak tree, too large to be a fallen branch, too still to be an animal seeking shelter. Sarah's heart quickened as she approached, her hand instinctively reaching for the small knife she kept at her belt. The shape resolved into a man, a young Cherokee scout, by the look of his worn buckskin clothing and the intricate beadwork. On his moccasins, his face was gaunt, cheekbones sharp beneath sun-weathered skin, and his breathing came in shallow, labored gasps. Blood had dried on a gash across his forehead, and his lips were cracked and pale. Sarah knelt beside him, her fingers finding the weak pulse at his throat. His skin burned with fever, and when she gently lifted one eyelid, she saw the telltale glaze of dehydration. How long had he been lying here? Days, perhaps. The recent frost would have preserved him somewhat, but another night in the open would surely kill him. She should have been afraid. The Cherokee had been forced from these lands years ago, marched westward on what folks called the Trail of Tears. Those who remained were considered outlaws, dangerous men who refused to leave their ancestral homes. The valley people spoke of Cherokee raids, of livestock stolen and barns burned. Just last month, the Miller farm had lost 3 cows to what everyone assumed were Cherokee thieves. But Sarah looked at the young man's face and saw only suffering. His age, perhaps 19 or 20, reminded her of her younger brother Thomas, who had died of fever 3 winters past. The same vulnerability in sleep, the same youth beneath the hardship etched into his features. Making her decision, Sarah set down her basket and slipped her arms beneath the scout's shoulders. He was lighter than she expected, his body wasted by hunger and illness. With considerable effort, she managed to prop him against the tree trunk, then retrieved her water flask from the basket. "Easy now," she murmured, tilting a few drops onto his cracked lips. "Just a little at first." The scout's eyes fluttered open, dark eyes that focused on her with startled intensity. He tried to pull away, his hand moving weakly toward a knife that wasn't there. "Peace," Sarah said softly, showing him her empty hands. "I mean you no harm." Understanding seemed to dawn in his eyes, followed quickly by shame. He tried to stand, to leave, but his legs buckled immediately. Sarah caught him before he could fall. "You're in no condition to go anywhere," she said firmly. "I'm Sarah Bennett. I live just up the ridge. Can you understand me?" The young man nodded slightly. "I speak English," he managed, his voice barely above a whisper. "My name is Joseph Blackfeather." "Well, Joseph Blackfeather, you're burning with fever and half-starved by the look of you. I can help, but you need to trust me." Joseph's eyes searched her face for a long moment before he nodded again. "I have no choice." With great difficulty, Sarah managed to get Joseph to his feet. He leaned heavily on her as they made their slow way up the path to her cabin. Several times she thought he might collapse entirely, but he seemed determined to remain conscious, his jaw set against the pane. The cabin was small but sturdy, built by Sarah's father before he died. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, and the small garden plot beside it lay dormant under a thin layer of frost. Sarah maneuvered Joseph through the door and onto the narrow bed in the corner, where he immediately lost consciousness again. Working. Quickly, Sarah built up the fire and set water to boil. She examined Joseph more thoroughly, finding several infected cuts on his arms and legs, signs of exposure, and the obvious malnutrition. His breathing was labored, suggesting possible pneumonia. Without proper treatment, he wouldn't last another day. Sarah spent the next hours cleaning and dressing his wounds, brewing medicinal teas, and spooning thin broth between his lips whenever he stirred. She used precious supplies, honey for the infected cuts, her last bit of deer jerky for the broth, herbs she'd been saving for emergencies. As the day wore on, Joseph drifted in and out of consciousness. During his lucid moments, he watched her with those dark, intelligent eyes, saying nothing. Sarah found herself talking to fill the silence, telling him about the herbs she was using, about the coming winter, about anything except the questions that burned in her mind. What was a Cherokee scout doing alone in these mountains? Why was he so far from his people? And what would happen if the valley folk discovered she was harboring him? The sun was setting when Joseph finally spoke again. "Why?" he asked, his voice stronger but still rough. "Why help me?" Sarah paused in her work, considering. "Because you needed help," she said simply. "Because I could give it. Your people. They fear mine, hate us." "Some do," Sarah admitted, "but hate and fear are choices. I choose differently." Joseph studied her face. "You risk much." "Perhaps. But my grandmother taught me that healing knows no boundaries. She helped anyone who came to her door. White, black, Cherokee, it didn't matter. Suffering is suffering." "Your grandmother was Cherokee?" Sarah shook her head. "No, but she knew your people, learned from them. Many of the remedies I use came from Cherokee healers." She gestured to the dried plants hanging from the rafters. "This knowledge belongs to no one. It belongs to anyone who needs it." That night, Sarah barely slept. She dozed in the chair by the fire, waking frequently to check on Joseph, to spoon more broth into him, to cool his fever with damp cloths. His condition seemed to stabilize, though he remained dangerously weak. The next morning brought improvement. Joseph's fever had broken, and he was able to sit up and take solid food, though Sarah noticed how slowly he ate the cornbread and dried apple she offered, as if savoring every bite. "How long since you've eaten?" she asked. 5 days, he admitted. "Maybe 6. I lost count." "What happened to you?" Joseph was quiet for a long moment. "I was scouting for my brothers. We never left. When they forced our people west, some of us stayed, hidden. We live in the high mountains. Now where white men don't go." "How many of you?" "Enough." His expression closed off, and Sarah didn't press. As the day progressed, Joseph grew stronger. He was able to stand, to move about the cabin slowly. Sarah caught him studying her books, her medical supplies, the careful organization of her small space. "You live alone," he observed. "Yes, my parents died 3 years ago. Fever. My brother too." "No husband?" Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. "No. The valley men, they don't understand my work. They want wives who'll tend the house and raise children, not one who spends her time gathering herbs and treating illness." "Their loss," Joseph said quietly. That afternoon, Sarah made a decision that she knew could endanger them both. She needed supplies More food, certainly, and specific herbs for Joseph's recovery. But going to the valley store meant risking questions she couldn't answer. "I need to go down to the settlement," she told Joseph. "You'll be safe here. Rest. I'll be back before dark." Joseph caught her arm as she reached for her cloak. "If they suspect, they won't. I go to the store every week. It would be more suspicious if I didn't." The trek down to Pine Valley's small settlement took an hour. The general store, run by the perpetually suspicious Hiram Crawford, sat at the crossroads, where the valley's dirt roads met. Sarah steeled herself as she entered, the bell above the door announcing her arrival. "Afternoon, Miss Bennet," Crawford said, his eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed spectacles. "Bit late in the week for your usual visit." The Johnson baby took a turn, needed to tend to him first. Sarah moved through the store, selecting items carefully. Salt pork, cornmeal, dried beans, more than she usually bought. "Stocking up, I see," Crawford observed. "Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." "Winter's coming fast. Don't want to be caught short when the snow flies." Crawford nodded, but his expression remained watchful. As Sarah paid for her goods, he leaned forward conspiratorially. "You heard about the troubles up Millerville way?" "No." "What troubles?" "Cherokee. Bunch of them raided the Baxter farm, made off with 2 horses and near a month's worth of preserved meat. Folks are saying they're getting bolder, coming down from wherever they're hiding." Sarah kept her expression neutral. "I hadn't heard." "You be careful up there on the ridge, Miss Bennet, living alone and all. Maybe you should come stay in town until this blows over." "I'll be fine, Mr. Crawford. I've got Father's rifle, and I know how to use it." Crawford grunted, clearly unconvinced. As Sarah left the store, she felt his eyes following her. The walk back to the cabin seemed longer, every shadow a potential threat. Not from Cherokee scouts, but from her own neighbors' fear and suspicion. When she returned, she found Joseph, standing by the window, tense and alert. He relaxed visibly when he saw her. "Trouble? No, but people are talking about raids north of here." Joseph's face darkened. "Not us. We take only what we need to survive, and never from those who can't spare it." "I believe you. But fear makes... People see threats everywhere." That evening, as they shared a simple meal, Joseph seemed preoccupied. Finally, he set down his plate and looked at her directly. "I must leave tomorrow." Sarah had known this was coming, but the words still hit her like a cold wind. "You're not strong enough." "I'm strong enough to travel, and every day I stay puts you in greater danger." "Where will you go?" "Back to my people. My brothers will be looking for me." He paused. "Sarah, what you've done, my people will know of it. We don't forget kindness." "I don't want gratitude. I want you to survive." Joseph smiled then, the first real smile she'd seen from him. It transformed his face, revealing the young man beneath the scout's weathered exterior. "Thanks to you, I will." That night, Sarah gave Joseph her father's old coat and a packet of food for his journey. She tried not to think about the empty cabin, about returning to her solitary existence. In just 2 days, his presence had filled a loneliness she hadn't let herself acknowledge. The morning dawned grey and cold. Joseph was already awake when Sarah stirred, standing by the door with the coat around his shoulders. He looked stronger, though still thin, his dark eyes alert and determined. "The path north is treacherous," Sarah said, handing him a roughly drawn map. "Follow the creek until you reach the split rock, then bear east. It'll take you around the Patterson farm. They've got dogs." Joseph tucked the map inside his coat. "Sarah," he began, then stopped. They stood awkwardly for a moment, the unspoken hanging between them. Then Joseph reached into a small pouch at his belt and withdrew something wrapped in soft leather. "This was my mother's," he said, placing it in Sarah's hands. "She was a healer like you." Sarah unwrapped the leather to find a small carved pendant, a piece of jade in the shape of a bird, strung on a leather cord. The carving was exquisite, each tiny detail perfect. I can't... Please, it's meant to protect healers. She would want you to have it. Before Sarah could respond, Joseph stepped through the door into the morning mist. She watched him make his way up the path, his figure growing smaller until the forest swallowed him completely. The pendant was warm in her palm, the only proof that the past 2 days hadn't been a dream. The cabin felt impossibly empty. Sarah went through the motions of her day, tending the fire, preparing medicines, organizing herbs, but her thoughts kept drifting to Joseph. Had he made it safely to the high passes, found his way back to his brothers? As afternoon faded to evening, Sarah decided to walk down to the creek for water. The forest was quiet, winter still, with only the whisper of wind through bare branches. She had just filled her bucket when she heard it, the sound of horses approaching fast. Her heart lurched. Riders meant trouble. She moved quickly back toward the cabin, but before she could reach it, 3 men on horseback burst from the tree line. Sarah recognized them, Tom Patterson and his sons, their faces grim beneath wide-brimmed hats. "Miss Bennett," Patterson called, reining in his horse. "We're looking for a Cherokee scout, escaped prisoner, might be wounded. You seen anyone strange about?" Sarah's mind raced. Escaped prisoner. Joseph hadn't mentioned. "No," she said carefully. "I've seen no one." The younger Patterson boy, Samuel, dismounted and walked toward her cabin. "Mind if we look around? For your safety, of course." "Man's dangerous. I told you I've seen no one." But Samuel was already at her door, pushing it open. Sarah's heart pounded as he disappeared inside. Joseph had left that morning. There should be nothing to find. But had she cleaned away all traces of his presence? Long moments passed before Samuel emerged. In his hand was a strip of bloodied cloth, one of the bandages Sarah had used on Joseph's wounds. "Nothing, you said." Samuel's voice was cold. Patterson dismounted, his face dark with anger. "Where is he?" "I don't know what you're talking about. Don't lie to us, woman. That's Cherokee weaving on that bandage. You've been harboring a fugitive." "I'm a healer," Sarah said, lifting her chin. "I help anyone who needs it, even murdering savages." "What murder?" "You said he was an escaped prisoner from the army stockade, killed a guard during the escape, and you helped him." Patterson stepped closer, his breath hot on her face. "That makes you an accomplice." Sarah's mind reeled. Joseph hadn't seemed like a killer, but then what did she really know about him? "He left this morning," she said finally. "Heading north. That's all I know." Patterson studied her for a long moment, then nodded to his sons. "We ride north. Samuel, you stay here. Make sure Miss Bennett doesn't get any ideas about warning her Cherokee friend." As Patterson and his older son thundered off into the gathering darkness, Sarah found herself under guard in her own home. Samuel sat by her door, rifle across his knees, watching her with suspicious eyes. The pendant Joseph had given her seemed to burn against her chest, where she'd hidden it beneath her dress. Whatever Joseph had done or not done, whatever his reasons for being in that army stockade, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she'd made the right choice. The young man she'd nursed back to health hadn't been a cold-blooded killer. She was certain of that. But certainty, she was learning, could be a dangerous thing in a world where fear and hatred ran deeper than the valley itself. As night fell and the moon rose over the mountains, Sarah sat by her fire and wondered if Joseph had found his brothers, if Patterson would catch him, and what price she might yet pay for 2 days of compassion in a world that seemed to have little room for it. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of snow and something else, something that made Samuel shift nervously at his post. Smoke. Not wood smoke from a chimney, but the acrid smell of burning pine pitch. Sarah moved to the window and saw it then. A line of fire across the mountain pass, bright against the darkness. The Cherokee had come. The line of fire stretched across Eagle's Pass like a burning necklace, each flame precisely placed to block the only route through the mountains. Samuel Patterson stood quickly, his rifle raised, his young face pale in the reflected light. What in God's name? Sarah understood immediately. The fires were signals, warnings, and barriers all at once. Joseph's brothers had indeed come, and they controlled the high ground. A chill ran through her that had nothing to do with the mountain air. From somewhere in the darkness came the sound of drums, not the war drums of settler nightmares, but a steady, measured beat that seemed to vibrate through the very ground. Samuel's hands shook as he gripped his rifle tighter. "They're surrounding us," he whispered. "No," Sarah said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "If they wanted to surround us, we'd never have seen the fires. This is something else." The drumbeat grew louder, joined by others, creating a rhythm that seemed to pull at something deep in Sarah's chest. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the drumming stopped. The silence that followed was absolute, heavy with anticipation. A figure emerged from the forest edge, tall, dressed in buckskin and bearing a torch. As he stepped into the clearing around Sarah's cabin, the moonlight revealed a face that was unmistakably related to Joseph's, though older, harder. Behind him, other figures materialized from the shadows, at least a dozen Cherokee warriors, their faces painted with designs that seemed to shift in the flickering torchlight. Samuel raised his rifle, but Sarah placed her hand on the barrel, pushing it down. "Don't be a fool. You're outnumbered and they haven't made any threatening moves." The lead warrior stepped forward. When he spoke, his English was accented but clear. "I am Matthew Blackfeather. You helped my brother." It wasn't a question. Sarah met his gaze steadily. "Joseph, yes, I helped him." Matthew studied her for a long moment, then held up something in his hand, a small piece of jade carved into a bird shape. Sarah's hand went instinctively to her chest, where the matching pendant lay hidden. "He left this at our camp, along with his story. Said a white woman healed him, risked her own safety, gave him food when she had little to spare." Matthew's eyes were dark, unreadable. "We came to see if this was the truth or a fever dream." "It's truth," Sarah said simply. "The men hunting him, where are they?" "Rode north 2 hours ago, through the pass." A ghost of a smile crossed Matthew's face. "They won't get far. The pass is closed." Samuel found his voice. "You can't just—" He was cut off as one of the warriors stepped forward and placed a blade against his throat. Sarah gasped, but Matthew raised his hand, and the warrior stepped back. "Boy," Matthew said coldly, "your father and his kind have hunted us like animals, driven us from our homes, murdered our families. Give me one reason why I shouldn't return the favor." Samuel's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. Sarah stepped between them. "Because that would make you no different from them," she said. "And because Joseph wouldn't want it." Matthew's expression shifted slightly. "You speak as if you know my brother well." "I know he's not a killer, despite what they say." "And what do they say?" Sarah glanced at Samuel, who had gone very still. "That he killed a guard, escaped from an army stockade." For the first time, anger flashed across Matthew's face. A guard who was beating a Cherokee child, a boy of 10 winters who'd done nothing but beg for food. Joseph intervened. The guard drew his pistol. Joseph had no choice. That's not what we were told," Samuel stammered. "Your people hear what they want to hear." Matthew turned back to Sarah. "But you saw only a man in need. Why?" Sarah thought of her grandmother, of the stories she'd told of the Cherokee, healers who had shared their knowledge freely before the world had gone mad with greed and fear. Because healing has no color, no tribe, no side. Matthew was quiet for a long moment. Then he gestured to his warriors, who began unpacking bundles they carried. To Sarah's amazement, they laid out food supplies, dried meat, cornmeal, beans, even precious salt, far more than she'd given Joseph. "A debt repaid," Matthew said, "with interest. This is too much. Winter comes. You will need it." His expression softened slightly. "Joseph also said you live alone, that your family is—" "Gone," Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. "Then know this, Sarah Bennet. You are under the protection of the Blackfeather clan. Any who would harm you will answer to us." Samuel made a strangled sound. "The army will hear about this. They'll come looking." "Let them come," Matthew said. "We know these mountains better than they ever will, and now we know we have at least one friend in the valley." He paused, studying Sarah's face in the torchlight. "Joseph asked me to tell you something. He said you would understand." "What?" "That the bird protects the healer, and the healer protects the truth." Sarah's hand went again to the pendant at her chest. Yes, she understood. The truth about what happened at the stockade. The truth about who the Cherokee really were. The truth that compassion could bridge the artificial chasms men created between peoples. Matthew signaled to his warriors, and they began to retreat back into the forest. As they reached the tree line, he turned back one final time. "The pass will, too, remain closed until dawn. Your father and the other one, they're safe but delayed. We have no quarrel with them unless they make one." His gaze shifted to Samuel. "Tell your people what you've seen here. Tell them the truth if you have the courage." Then they were gone, melting back into the darkness as if they'd never been. Only the supplies remained as proof of their visit. That and the dying flames across the mountain pass. Samuel sank onto the doorstep, his rifle forgotten beside him. His face was pale, confused, wrestling with everything he'd just witnessed. "They could have killed us both," he said finally. "But they didn't. That man, Matthew, he said Joseph killed a guard defending a child, but everyone says what they want to believe," Sarah said gently. "What's easier to believe? That the Cherokee are savages, or that sometimes we're the ones who act savagely?" Samuel was quiet for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice was different, uncertain. "My grandfather knew Cherokee before the removal, said they were good people, proud people. My father says he was a fool. What do you say?" I don't know anymore." Sarah sat beside him on the step. Above them, the stars were brilliant in the cold mountain air. "That's the beginning of wisdom, Samuel. Not knowing, being willing to question what we've been told." They sat in silence, watching the last of the signal fires burn down to embers. Near dawn, they heard horses approaching, Patterson and his older son looking frustrated and confused. "The damnedest thing," Patterson muttered as he dismounted. "The pass was blocked, fires everywhere, and when we tried to go around, there were these symbols painted on the trees, kept leading us in circles." He looked at Samuel. "Anything happen here?" Samuel glanced at Sarah, then at his father. For a moment, Sarah thought he would tell everything. Then he straightened, his young face set in new lines. "No, Pa, nothing happened. Miss Bennet just tended her fire and worked on her medicines. Like always." Patterson grunted, clearly suspicious but unable to prove anything. As the three men prepared to leave, Samuel lingered behind. "I won't say anything," he told Sarah quietly, "about the supplies, about any of it." "Why?" He looked toward the mountains, where the sun was just beginning to paint the peaks gold. "Because maybe it's time someone told a different story. Maybe it's time we stopped being afraid of the truth." After they left, Sarah stood in her doorway, watching the morning light creep down the mountainsides. The jade pendant was warm against her skin, a reminder that the world was larger and more complex than the narrow valley she called home. Over the following weeks, subtle changes rippled through Pine Valley. Samuel Patterson stopped repeating his father's bitter stories about the Cherokee. When asked about the night at Sarah's cabin, he simply said the scout had vanished into the mountains. And that was that. Sarah found herself busier than ever. People still came for her healing skills, but now they lingered, asked questions, listened to her stories about herbal remedies and where they came from. The fear that had gripped the valley began to ease, replaced by something else, curiosity perhaps, or the first stirrings of understanding. On the coldest night of winter, when snow lay thick on the ground and the wind howled through the passes, Sarah heard a soft knock at her door. Opening it, she found a bundle on her doorstep, fresh meat wrapped in deerskin and a small pouch of herbs she didn't recognize. No footprints marked the snow. Inside the pouch was a note in careful English. For the healer, from those who remember. Spring came early that year, melting the snow and opening the passes. Travelers brought word from the outside world of continued tensions between the government and the remaining Cherokee, of raids and reprisals, of a world still torn by fear and misunderstanding. But in Pine Valley, something had shifted. When Samuel Patterson became the valley's first sheriff 5 years later, he made it known that all people, regardless of their blood, would be treated fairly under his watch. When Sarah opened a proper clinic with the help of mysterious benefactors, she treated white settlers and the occasional Cherokee visitor with equal care, and on clear nights, when the moon was full, signal fires could sometimes be seen on the high ridges. Not warnings now, but greetings, reminders that in a world divided by hatred, small acts of kindness could still build bridges between peoples. Sarah never saw Joseph again, though she heard whispers that he had become a leader among his people, advocating for peace and understanding. She wore the jade pendant always, a symbol of the choice she'd made on that cold autumn day, to see the human being behind the label, to heal rather than harm, to build rather than destroy. Years later, when she was an old woman training her granddaughter in the healing arts, Sarah would tell the story of the starving scout and the lesson he'd taught her, that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act with compassion despite it, that the walls between peoples were built by human hands and could be torn down the same way, one act of kindness at a time. The valley remembered too. In the small cemetery where Sarah was eventually laid to rest, a marker appeared one spring morning, a piece of carved jade in the shape of a bird, and beside it an eagle feather. No one knew who had placed them there, but everyone understood their meaning. Here lay a bridge builder, a healer who had chosen to see with the heart rather than through the lens of fear. As the years passed and the story was retold, it changed, and grew, as stories do. But at its heart remained a simple truth, that in the darkest times, when hatred seems strongest, the light of human compassion can still find a way to shine through. And sometimes that light is enough to change the world, one person at a time. The Cherokee continued to live in their hidden valleys, the settlers continued to farm the lowlands, and while true peace remained elusive, something had begun that could not be stopped. The slow recognition that perhaps, despite everything, they had more in common than anyone had dared to believe. On certain nights, when the wind was right, you could still hear drumming from the high places, not the drums of war, but the steady beat of endurance, of survival, of hope. And in Pine Valley, children grew up knowing that kindness could be stronger than fear, that understanding could bridge the deepest divides, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was simply to see humanity in another's eyes. Sarah Bennett's cabin still stood on the ridge, weathered but solid, a testament to the durability of compassion in a harsh world. Travelers passing by would sometimes stop to rest in its shadow, never knowing that they stood where the seeds of change had first been planted, where a woman had chosen to heal rather than turn away, and in doing so had begun to heal a wound that ran deeper than any mountain valley. In the end, that was perhaps the greatest legacy of all, the proof that one person's choice to act with love rather than fear could ripple outward, touching lives for generations to come. The Cherokee scouts continued to move through the mountains. The settlers continued to work their farms. But now, sometimes, when they met on the winding mountain paths, they would nod to each other with something approaching respect. For they had learned what Sarah had always known, that beneath the surface differences, beneath the fear and misunderstanding, they were all simply human beings trying to survive in a difficult world. And sometimes that recognition was enough to make all the difference. The jade bird pendant was eventually passed down through generations, each bearer adding their own chapter to the story. And though the details might change with each telling, the heart of it remained. When you choose to see with compassion rather than fear, you choose to be part of the solution rather than the problem. It was a lesson Pine Valley never forgot, and one that continued to shape its destiny long after. The original players had passed into legend, for in the end, that's what true change looks like. Not grand gestures or dramatic confrontations, but the quiet accumulation of small acts of courage, building slowly toward a better world. 10 years had passed since that fateful autumn when Sarah Bennett found Joseph Blackfeather collapsed beneath the ancient oak. The valley had changed in ways both subtle and profound. Sarah's small cabin had grown into a proper clinic, its walls expanded to accommodate the increasing number of patients who sought her care. Her grey-streaked hair was usually tied back now, and fine lines creased the corners of her eyes. But her hands remained as steady and gentle as ever. The morning mail brought an unexpected letter, its elegant script addressing her as Dr. Bennett, a title she'd never claimed, but that the valley folk had bestowed upon her. The return address made her breath catch: Washington, District of Columbia, Office of Indian Affairs. Inside, the letter was brief but shocking. The Commissioner of Indian Affairs requested her presence at a federal hearing regarding the matter of Cherokee land claims in the Eastern Territories. Her name, it seemed, had been put forward by someone identified only as J. Blackfeather, as a critical witness to events that might influence new legislation. Sarah sat heavily in her chair, the letter trembling in her hands. Joseph, after all these years, was it possible? She'd heard nothing directly from him since that morning he'd walked away into the mist, though she'd felt his influence in 100 small ways. The mysterious supplies that appeared when her stores ran low, the Cherokee patients who occasionally sought her help, knowing somehow that she could be trusted. 3 weeks later, Sarah found herself in a wood-paneled chamber in the capital, her simple mountain dress standing out among the formal suits and military uniforms. The committee members sat elevated behind a long bench, their faces stern and skeptical. Among the crowd, she searched for a familiar face but found none. The committee chairman, a severe man named Harrison, called the session to order. "We are here to examine claims that certain Cherokee bands never left their ancestral lands and have maintained continuous presence despite the Indian Removal Act. Miss Bennett, you have been called to testify about an incident involving one Joseph Blackfeather, alleged to be a leader among these illegal residents." As Sarah rose to take her place at the witness stand, a side door opened. Her heart stopped. Joseph entered, but this was not the starving young scout she'd rescued. This man carried himself with quiet authority, his hair now touched with premature silver, his bearing that of someone who had seen too much too young. His eyes found hers across the room, and for a moment time collapsed. Behind Joseph came Matthew and several other Cherokee men, all dressed in a mixture of traditional and contemporary clothing. Among them was a white man Sarah didn't recognize, young, earnest-faced, with the bearing of an attorney. "I am Thomas Morrison," the young lawyer announced, "counsel for the Eastern Band of Cherokee. My clients wish to present evidence that their presence in the Appalachian Territories predates and supersedes the Removal Act, and that certain actions taken against them constitute violations of both treaty and natural law." Chairman Harrison's face darkened. This is highly irregular, no more irregular than the attempted forced removal of people from lands they've occupied for thousands of years, Morrison countered. My clients have a right to be heard. The chairman grudgingly allowed the Cherokee delegation to be seated. As the hearing progressed, a story began to unfold that went far beyond Sarah's simple act of kindness. Joseph, it emerged, had spent the past decade documenting Cherokee presence in the mountains, gathering evidence and building bridges with sympathetic whites. His work had caught the attention of reformers in Washington, people who questioned the justice of Indian removal. When Sarah finally testified, she spoke simply and directly about finding Joseph, about her choice to help him, about the night. Matthew and his warriors had come to her cabin, but she spoke too about what had come after, the slow transformation of Pine Valley, the gradual erosion of fear and prejudice. The Cherokee never left those mountains, she said firmly. They couldn't. Those hills aren't just land to them, they're sacred. They're home in a way that goes deeper than deeds or titles. Joseph taught me that. His people have survived up there, hurting no one, taking only what they need to live. The real crime would be to drive them out now. As she spoke, she became aware of a stirring in the gallery. Other witnesses had come forward. Samuel Patterson, now sheriff of Pine Valley, who testified about the peaceful coexistence that had developed. A minister who spoke of Cherokee children he'd been teaching to read. Even old Hiram Crawford from the general store, who grudgingly admitted that his Cherokee customers had always dealt fairly with him. The most dramatic moment came when Morrison introduced a series of documents, treaties dating back 50 years, that had guaranteed Cherokee rights to certain mountain territories, agreements that had been conveniently forgotten during the removal period. Joseph himself took the stand, speaking eloquently about his people's connection to the land, their desire for peace, their hope for legal recognition. We do not ask for much, he said, his voice carrying the authority of natural leadership. Only the right to live where our ancestors lived, to raise our children in the old ways while preparing them for the new. Sarah Bennett showed us that understanding between peoples is possible. We ask now for that understanding to be made law. The hearing stretched into a second day, then a third. Witnesses spoke of atrocities during the removal, of families torn apart, of the thousands who had died on the Trail of Tears. But they spoke too of hope, of the possibility of a different way forward. On the final day, something unexpected happened. A cavalry officer in full uniform stood to speak, Colonel James Henderson, a man with a reputation as a fierce Indian fighter. The room fell silent, expecting him to denounce the Cherokee claims. Instead, he spoke of a night 5 years earlier when his patrol had been caught in a blizzard in the high passes. They would have frozen to death, he said, if not for a group of Cherokee who had found them and led them to shelter. The leader of that group, Henderson said slowly, was Joseph Blackfeather, the same man they say is a dangerous fugitive. He could have left us to die. God knows we'd given his people reason enough to hate us. Instead, he saved 12 soldiers' lives. That's not the act of a savage. That's the act of a man of honor. By the hearing's end, the mood in the chamber had shifted palpably. The committee retired to deliberate, leaving the gallery buzzing with speculation. Sarah found herself face to face with Joseph for the first time in a decade. "You look well," he said simply. "As do you. Though I suspect our paths have been very different." Joseph smiled, and she saw traces of the young man she'd known, perhaps not so different. "We've both been healing in our way." The committee's decision when it came was cautious but groundbreaking. They recommended the establishment of a new Eastern Cherokee Reserve in the high mountains, a place where Joseph's people could live legally with protected status. It wasn't everything the Cherokee had hoped for, but it was a beginning. The implementation wasn't smooth. There were protests, legal challenges, bitter editorials in newspapers across the South. But public opinion had begun to shift. Stories spread of the mountain Cherokee who had survived against all odds, of the white woman who had chosen compassion over fear, of the slow reconciliation happening in places like Pine Valley. Sarah returned home to find her clinic busier than ever. Cherokee came down from the mountains more openly now, seeking her care and sometimes staying to trade or work in the valley. She began training apprentices, both white and Cherokee, passing on the healing knowledge that had no racial boundaries. Joseph visited when he could, their friendship deepening into something neither quite dared to name. He was often away, traveling between Washington and the new reserve, working to establish schools and clinics, negotiating the complex balance between preserving tradition and adapting to change. The reserve's official opening came in spring, marked by a ceremony that drew visitors from across the country. Sarah stood with the other honored guests as Joseph, now recognized as a principal chief of the Eastern Band, spoke to the gathered crowd. "Today marks not just a victory for the Cherokee," he said, "but a victory for justice, for compassion, for the belief that different peoples can share this land in peace. We have been through darkness. Many were lost, but we survived, and we survived because some had the courage to see our humanity." Sarah Bennett was the first. She chose to heal rather than fear. That choice rippled outward, touching hearts, changing minds. Today, we begin to heal the wounds of the past. Today, we choose hope. The years that followed saw the mountain reserve flourish. A school was built where Cherokee children learned both traditional ways and modern subjects. A hospital rose beside it, where healers trained in both Cherokee and Western medicine. Trade increased between the reserve and surrounding communities. Pine Valley became known as a place where cultures met and mingled peacefully. Sarah's role evolved from healer to teacher to bridge builder. She helped establish exchange programs where white and Cherokee children learned together. She mediated disputes, translated not just languages but worldviews, helped both sides see the humanity in the other. One autumn day, 15 years after Joseph's return to Pine Valley, Sarah received a delegation of visitors, government officials from Washington, come to see the miracle of the mountains for themselves. They wanted to understand how Pine Valley had succeeded where so many other places had failed. "There's no miracle," Sarah told them as they sat in her clinic. "Just people choosing day by day to see each other as human beings." Joseph says, his people have a phrase, "We are all related." It took us a while to understand that, but once we did, everything else followed. The youngest official, an earnest man named Williams, pressed her. "But surely there's more to it. Some program, some system you implemented?" Sarah smiled. "The only program was kindness. The only system was listening. You can't legislate compassion, Mr. Williams. You can only choose it, one person at a time." That evening, Joseph found her sitting on the bench outside her clinic, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. He sat beside her, comfortable in the silence they'd learned to share. "They want to replicate Pine Valley across the country," she said finally. "And what did you tell them?" "That they can't replicate what they don't understand. This didn't happen because of policies or programs. It happened because people chose to change." Joseph nodded. "My grandmother used to say that the longest journey begins with seeing clearly. You helped us all see more clearly, Sarah." The sun dipped below the ridgeline, and the first stars appeared. From somewhere in the valley came the sound of children laughing, Cherokee and white together, their voices indistinguishable in play. It was a sound that had once been impossible to imagine, now so common as to be unremarkable. Sarah thought about the journey that had brought them here, from that cold morning when she'd found a starving scout to this moment of quiet triumph. She thought about choices and consequences, about how small acts of kindness could reshape the world. "Do you ever wonder," she asked, What would have happened if things had been different that day? If I'd passed by, or if Samuel had convinced his father to search the cabin more thoroughly? Joseph was quiet for a moment. I used to, but I've learned that wondering about different paths doesn't change the one we're on. We can only move forward. From where we are, in the years that followed, Pine Valley's story spread. Delegations came from across the country to study their model of cultural coexistence. Books were written, lectures given, policies drafted, but those who came looking for a simple solution always left somewhat frustrated. The secret, they learned, wasn't in any system or structure. It was in the daily choice to see the humanity. In others, to heal rather than harm, to build rather than destroy. Sarah and Joseph worked side by side as the years passed, their partnership, both professional and personal, deepening into something that transcended easy categories. They never married. The laws and social pressures of the time made that impossible, but their bond was recognized and respected by both communities. The mountain reserve grew into a thriving community, a place where Cherokee culture was preserved while adapting to the changing world. Trade routes developed, connecting the reserve to markets across the region. Cherokee craftsmen and healers became renowned, their work sought after far beyond the mountains. As Sarah aged, she began writing down the stories and remedies she'd learned, creating a comprehensive guide to Appalachian healing that drew from both Cherokee and European traditions. Joseph contributed his own knowledge, and together they created something new, a synthesis of wisdom that belonged fully to neither tradition, yet honored both. One spring morning, 30 years after that first encounter beneath the oak tree, Sarah woke to find a carefully wrapped package on her doorstep. Inside was a beautifully woven blanket, its pattern telling a story in the Cherokee way. She traced the designs with trembling fingers, reading the tale woven into the fabric. A woman finding a wounded bird, nursing it back to health, and watching it soar free. But the bird returned, bringing others, until the sky was full of wings, and the earth below flourished in their shadow. At the bottom of the package was a note in Joseph's careful hand, "For the woman who taught us all to fly." Sarah's final years were spent in quiet satisfaction, watching the seeds she'd planted continue to grow. The clinic she'd established evolved into a teaching hospital where healers of all backgrounds came to study. The valley prospered, its example cited in Congress as proof that different peoples could coexist in harmony. When Sarah Bennett passed peacefully one winter night at the age of 82, the mourners at her funeral reflected the transformation she'd helped bring about. Cherokee chiefs stood beside valley farmers, government officials beside mountain herbalists. Joseph, now silver-haired and stopped but still commanding, spoke the eulogy. "She was a healer," he said simply, "not just of bodies, but of the rifts between peoples. She showed us that the divisions we create are artificial, that beneath our different traditions and languages we share a common humanity. Her legacy lives not in buildings or laws, but in every act of kindness between strangers, every bridge built across cultural divides, every choice to heal rather than harm." Sarah was buried in the small cemetery overlooking the valley, her grave marked, with both a traditional headstone and a Cherokee memory pole. But her true memorial was the living community around her, a place where former enemies had become neighbors, where children grew up bilingual and bicultural, where the wounds of the past had been transformed into wisdom for the future. Years later, historians would debate the significance of Pine Valley's transformation. Some would attribute it to changing times, to evolving federal policies, to economic necessity, but those who had lived through it knew better. They knew it had begun with a single choice on a cold autumn morning, a choice to see the human, being beyond the label, to offer help without conditions, to trust in the possibility of understanding. The jade bird pendant, now in a museum dedicated to Appalachian history, drew thousands of visitors each year. Beside it hung a portrait of Sarah Bennett and Joseph Blackfeather standing together, their faces lined with age, but their eyes bright with shared purpose. The placard beneath read simply, "Two people who chose to see clearly, and in doing so helped a nation learn to see itself." In the end, that was perhaps Sarah's greatest achievement, not just the healing of bodies or the bridging of cultures, but the demonstration that ordinary people making extraordinary choices could bend the arc of history toward justice. The Cherokee continued to thrive in their mountain home. The valley continued to prosper, and new generations grew up taking for granted the peace their elders had fought so hard to achieve. Sarah Bennett's compassion had become their inheritance, a gift that kept on giving, rippling outward through time in ways she could never have imagined when she first knelt beside a dying stranger and chose to help. 50 years after Sarah Bennett's death, her great-grandniece, Rebecca Morrison, stood before a packed auditorium at the newly established Blackfeather Bennett Institute for Cultural Studies. The building itself was a marvel of architecture, blending Cherokee and European design elements into something entirely new. Cedar beams supported a soaring glass ceiling, while traditional stone walls housed the most advanced research facilities in Appalachia. Rebecca, now in her early 40s with auburn hair and her great-aunt's keen eyes, had spent the last decade uncovering documents that would reshape the understanding of American history. As lead curator of the Institute's archives, she'd discovered a hidden cache of letters between Sarah and Joseph that revealed the full scope of their collaboration. "What we're presenting today," Rebecca announced to the assembly of scholars, tribal leaders, and government officials, "challenges everything we thought we knew about Cherokee resistance and cultural preservation." These documents prove that what happened in Pine Valley wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a coordinated network that stretched across the southeast. She activated the holographic display, and handwritten letters materialized in the air, their faded ink restored to clarity by advanced imaging technology. The audience leaned forward as Rebecca began to read. "My dearest Sarah," she recited from Joseph's letter dated 1851, "the seeds we planted have taken root in ways we never imagined. I've just returned from the Smoky Mountain settlements, where 3 more communities have adopted our model. The Underground Railroad you helped establish for Cherokee families has successfully relocated over 200 people to safety. Your medical protocols have been implemented in 17 mountain clinics. We are not just surviving, we are creating something new." The revelation sent ripples through the academic community. The Pine Valley model had been far more extensive than anyone realized. Sarah and Joseph hadn't just transformed one community, they'd orchestrated a quiet revolution that had saved thousands of lives and preserved Cherokee culture during its darkest hour. Rebecca's research partner, Dr. James Blackfeather, Joseph's great-great-grandson, stepped forward to present their findings on the medical innovations that had emerged from Sarah and Joseph's collaboration. By combining Cherokee botanical knowledge with emerging Western medical practices, James explained, displaying chemical analyses on the screen, they developed treatments that were decades ahead of their time. This compound here, which they called Mountain Mercy, contains precursors to several modern antibiotics. They were essentially practicing integrated medicine a century before it became accepted. The presentation revealed that Sarah had trained not just a handful of apprentices, but had established an entire network of healers who operated in secret, serving both Cherokee and poor white communities throughout Appalachia. These healers had maintained detailed records, creating a parallel medical tradition that had influenced American healthcare in ways previously unrecognized. As the conference progressed, more stunning revelations emerged. Archaeological teams, had discovered a series of hidden Cherokee settlements throughout the mountains, places where families had lived for decades after the removal, supported by the network Sarah and Joseph had created. These communities had developed their own educational systems, their own economies, their own hybrid culture that blended the best of both worlds. Professor Maria Santos from Harvard's Department of Indigenous Studies presented her analysis of the cultural artifacts found at these sites. What we're seeing is not just survival, but innovation. The Cherokee in these communities weren't simply preserving old ways. They were creating entirely new forms of expression. This pottery, for example, combines traditional Cherokee techniques with European glazing methods to create something unique. It's a material representation of cultural synthesis. The most dramatic moment came when Rebecca introduced a surprise guest, 90-year-old Mary Blackfeather Patterson, the daughter of Samuel Patterson and a Cherokee woman he'd married after the reserve was established. Mary, despite her age, commanded the stage with quiet dignity. "I knew Aunt Sarah," she said, her voice still strong. "Not by blood, but she was an aunt to all of us children in the valley. She and Chief Joseph, we all called him that by then. They taught us that identity wasn't about choosing one side or the other. It was about creating something new while honoring the old. I am equally Cherokee and settler, and that's not a contradiction. It's a completion." Mary's testimony bridged past and present, connecting the historical documents to living memory. She spoke of growing up in a community where bilingualism was normal, where Cherokee ceremonies were celebrated alongside Christian holidays, where children learned both traditional hunting skills and classical literature. As the conference continued over several days, it became clear that the impact of Sarah and Joseph's work extended far beyond what anyone had imagined. Dr. Robert Kim, a specialist in historical genetics, presented DNA evidence showing that the genetic diversity of Eastern Cherokee populations was significantly higher than previously thought, largely due to the protection networks that had allowed isolated groups to reconnect and thrive. Meanwhile, Dr. Patricia Williams from the University of Michigan School of Public Health demonstrated how the integrated healing practices developed in Pine Valley had influenced modern preventive medicine. The holistic approach that Sarah Bennett pioneered, treating not just symptoms but the whole person, considering both physical and spiritual health, laid the groundwork for what we now call patient-centered care. The economic implications were equally stunning. Professor David Chen's analysis showed that the trade networks established between Cherokee communities and valley settlements had created a unique economic model that balanced capitalism with traditional gift economies. This hybrid system had allowed both communities to prosper during the economic downturns of the late 19th century. But it was the political revelations that caused the greatest stir. Newly discovered correspondence showed that Joseph had been in contact with progressive politicians in Washington for decades, quietly influencing legislation on Native American rights. Several key provisions in later treaties could be traced directly to his advocacy. Rebecca presented a letter from a senator dated 1876. "Mr. Blackfeather, your proposal for educational sovereignty within reservation boundaries is both radical and necessary. I believe we can incorporate these ideas into the upcoming appropriations bill without drawing undue attention from our more conservative colleagues." This shadow diplomacy had resulted in protections and rights for Eastern Cherokee that had served as models for other tribes. The Pine Valley experiment had, in effect, become a laboratory for policies that would later be implemented nationwide. As the conference moved into its final day, the focus shifted from past to future. Young scholars from both Cherokee and non-native backgrounds presented research on how the Blackfeather Bennett model could address contemporary challenges. Dr. Amelia Running Bear, a professor of sustainable development, demonstrated how the traditional ecological knowledge preserved by the mountain Cherokee could help combat climate change. The forest management practices they developed, combining indigenous burning techniques with selective harvesting, resulted in forests that are more resilient to drought and disease. These methods are now being studied by the Forest Service. Similarly, educators were examining the bilingual, bicultural education model that had emerged from Pine Valley's schools. Dr. Carlos Mendoza presented data showing that students in programs based on this model showed higher creativity scores and better problem-solving abilities than those in conventional schools. The conference's final session brought together tribal leaders, government, officials, and academics to discuss implementing these historical lessons in contemporary policy. Secretary of the Interior, Margaret Yazzie, herself a member of the Navajo Nation, addressed the assembly. What Sarah Bennett and Joseph Blackfeather proved is that different peoples can not only coexist, but can create something greater through their interaction. Their legacy challenges us to move beyond mere tolerance to true collaboration. The question now is, how do we apply these lessons to today's challenges? The panel discussion that followed was intense and sometimes contentious. Issues of cultural appropriation versus cultural exchange were debated. Questions arose about how to balance preservation of traditional ways with necessary adaptation. The ghost of historical trauma lingered in the room, even as participants sought paths forward. Dr. James Blackfeather offered a perspective that resonated with many. Sarah and Joseph didn't erase the past or pretend that injustices hadn't occurred. They acknowledged the pain while choosing to build something new. That's our challenge today, to honor the suffering of our ancestors while creating a future they would be proud of. As the conference concluded, Rebecca Morrison stood once more before the assembly, this time joined by representatives from dozens of tribes and cultural organizations. They announced the formation of the Blackfeather Bennett Foundation, dedicated to supporting communities seeking to bridge cultural divides. Our great-aunt and Chief Joseph showed us that change begins with individual choices, Rebecca said. But they also showed us that those choices can reshape institutions and societies. We're not just preserving their legacy, we're extending it. The Foundation's first initiative would be establishing healing centers in communities torn by cultural conflict, places where traditional and modern medicine would work side by side, where different peoples could learn from each other in safety and respect. Outside the conference center, a new generation of activists and healers gathered. Young Cherokee students compared notes with medical residents. Tribal attorneys discussed strategy with environmental lawyers. Teachers shared curriculum ideas that blended indigenous knowledge with contemporary science. Maya Blackfeather, a young climate scientist and direct descendant of Joseph, spoke with a group of students. My great-great-great-grandfather believed that survival meant adaptation without losing essence. That's what we face now with climate change. We need the wisdom of all peoples, all traditions, to navigate what's coming. The media coverage of the conference sparked national debate. Op-eds questioned whether the Pine Valley model could work in more diverse urban settings. Cable news pundits argued about the implications for immigration policy and cultural integration. But beneath the noise, something had shifted. The story of Sarah and Joseph had entered the national consciousness as more than just history. It was a blueprint for possibility. In Pine Valley itself, now a thriving small city, the anniversary of Sarah finding Joseph was celebrated as Healing Day. Schools closed, and children participated in activities that taught both Cherokee and Appalachian traditions. The original oak tree where Joseph had collapsed still stood, protected by a small park. A plaque at its base read, "On this spot, Compassion chose courage over fear. Let all who pass remember that the greatest journeys begin with a single act of kindness. The valley's transformation continued. Tech companies had established research centers there, drawn by the unique blend of traditional knowledge and innovation. The Blackfeather Bennett Medical Center had become a leading institution for integrative medicine. The Cherokee language was taught in all schools, and street signs were bilingual. But challenges remained. Not everyone embraced the changes. Some. Cherokee traditionalists worried about cultural dilution. Some white residents resented what they saw as preferential treatment for Native Americans. The debates were real and sometimes heated, but they took place within a framework of mutual respect that Sarah and Joseph had established. As night fell on the final day of the conference, Rebecca Morrison stood in the Institute's meditation garden, a space designed to honor both Cherokee and European spiritual traditions. Water flowed over stones carved with symbols from both cultures, while native plants grew alongside herbs brought by European settlers. James Blackfeather joined her, and they stood in comfortable silence, reflecting on the week's revelations. And challenges, do you think they knew? Rebecca asked finally. Sarah and Joseph, did they have any idea their choices would ripple out like this? James considered. I think they knew they were planting seeds, but no one can predict exactly how a garden will grow. They trusted in the process, in the possibility of change. The garden was filling with conference attendees, drawn by the peaceful atmosphere. Conversations in multiple languages created a gentle hum, while somewhere in the distance, drums began a soft rhythm. Not a performance, just someone playing, for the joy of it. Rebecca pulled out a worn leather journal, Sarah's last diary, discovered just months ago. She opened it to a passage near the end. Joseph asked me today if I had any regrets. I told him only one, that we didn't have more time. But then I looked at the children playing in the schoolyard, Cherokee and white together, and I realized we did have more time. We have all the time that comes after us. In every choice made by those we've taught, the healing continues long after the healers are gone. As she closed the journal, Rebecca noticed a shooting star arc across the mountain sky. Around her, people from different backgrounds, different traditions, different perspectives stood together in the garden, continuing conversations that had begun with a starving scout and a compassionate healer. The work wasn't finished. Perhaps it never would be, but the path forward was clearer now, lit by the understanding that transformation was possible, that bridges could be built across the deepest divides, that healing was not just an individual act, but a collective journey. In the distance, the mountains stood eternal, witnesses to all that had changed and all that remained to be done. And in the garden, under stars that had watched over Cherokee and settler alike for countless generations, a new chapter was beginning, one that honored the past while reaching toward a future where, as Joseph had once written to Sarah, our children will not see strangers when they look at each other, but relatives they haven't met yet. The conference ended, but its effects rippled outward. Research projects were launched, partnerships were formed. Communities across the country began examining their own histories, looking for untold stories of cooperation and bridge building. In the end, that was perhaps the greatest legacy of Sarah Bennett and Joseph Blackfeather. Not just the specific changes they had made, but the proof they had offered that change itself was possible. They had shown that ordinary people, making extraordinary choices, could redirect the current of history toward justice and healing. As the participants departed, carrying their new knowledge back to their communities, the work continued. The Blackfeather Bennett Institute hummed with activity, its researchers and healers preparing for the next phase of discovery and reconciliation. The story that had begun with a simple act of compassion on a mountain path had become a movement, a philosophy, a living testament to the power of choosing understanding over fear. The future stretched ahead, uncertain, but full of possibility. And in that uncertainty lay hope, the same hope that had stirred in Sarah Bennett's heart when she first knelt beside a dying stranger and chose to help, the same hope that had sustained Joseph Blackfeather through years of struggle and transformation. It was a hope built not on naive optimism, but on the hard-won knowledge that change was possible, that healing could happen, that bridges could be built across any divide. And as new generations took up the work, adding their own chapters to the story, that hope continued to grow, spreading like ripples from a stone dropped in still water, reaching shores not yet imagined. 25 years after the groundbreaking conference at the Blackfeather Bennett Institute, the world had changed. In ways both profound and unexpected, the year 2099 brought challenges that neither Sarah Bennett nor Joseph Blackfeather could have imagined, yet their legacy proved more relevant than ever. Dr. Elena Blackfeather Chen stood before the holographic display in the Institute's new quantum research lab, her fingers dancing through streams of data that glowed in the air like fireflies. As the great-great-great-granddaughter of Joseph Blackfeather and a leading geneticist, she was on the verge of a discovery that would revolutionize medicine yet again. The ancestral memory markers are stronger than we hypothesized, she told her research team, highlighting specific gene sequences. The traditional healing knowledge isn't just cultural, it's literally encoded in our DNA, activated by specific environmental triggers and practices. Her colleague, Dr. Marcus Thompson, a descendant of formerly enslaved people who had found refuge in the Cherokee networks, leaned forward with interest. "You're saying the healing abilities Sarah Bennett documented weren't just learned behaviors?" Exactly. When Joseph's people shared their knowledge with Sarah, and when she integrated it with European herbalism, they were activating dormant genetic potentials in both populations. The hybrid vigor we've observed in mixed heritage individuals isn't just physical, it's cognitive, even spiritual. The implications were staggering. Climate change had triggered massive population displacements globally, creating cultural collision points that echoed the challenges of 19th century America. The Blackfeather Bennett model of cultural synthesis had become a template for refugee integration programs worldwide. In the Institute's Climate Adaptation Center, Director Ayanna Patterson Morales, descendant of Samuel Patterson and his Cherokee wife, coordinated global response networks. Massive screens displayed environmental crisis points, rising seas displacing Pacific Island nations, drought forcing African populations northward, extreme weather creating climate refugees across every continent. The Pine Valley Protocols are being implemented in 17 crisis zones, she reported to the International Council meeting. Communities that embrace cultural fusion show 300% better adaptation rates than those maintaining rigid separation. The quantum communicator crackled to life, bringing updates from field stations. In Bangladesh, where rising seas had forced millions inland, Cherokee-trained mediators worked alongside local healers to ease tensions between displaced coastal peoples and mountain communities. The techniques they used, ceremonial gift exchanges, joint healing rituals, shared agricultural projects, came directly from Sarah and Joseph's playbook. In Northern Europe, where Mediterranean climate refugees had sparked nationalist backlashes, teams trained at the Institute worked to recreate the Pine Valley Miracle. Young facilitators, carrying quantum-encrypted copies of Sarah's journals and Joseph's correspondence, taught host communities how to see migrants not as threats, but as carriers of valuable knowledge. Back in the lab, Elena's team made another breakthrough. "Look at this," she exclaimed, projecting neural pathway scans. When subjects practiced the integrated meditation techniques Joseph developed, their brains literally rewire for enhanced empathy and pattern recognition. It's not just philosophy, it's evolutionary adaptation. The discovery came at a critical Time. Artificial intelligence had reached a crisis point where machines needed to understand not just human logic, but human wisdom. The Cherokee concept of interconnectedness, preserved through the Blackfeather Bennett traditions, offered a framework for teaching AIs about relationships that transcended simple cause and effect. Dr. James Standing Bear, head of the Institute's AI Ethics Division, had been working on this challenge for years. Sarah Bennett understood something we're just now quantifying, he explained to a gathering of tech leaders. Healing happens in relationships. You can't separate the individual from the community from the environment, or the environment from the spiritual realm. AIs need to learn this holistic processing. The Quantum Lab's breakthrough attracted global attention. Within days, delegations arrived from the Mars colonies, where attempts to create sustainable communities had repeatedly failed due to cultural conflicts among the international crew members. The colony's psychological director, Dr. Lisa Nakamura, was desperate. "We've tried everything," she confided to Elena. "Separate cultural zones, enforced integration, rotating leadership. Nothing works. People retreat into ethnic enclaves, and cooperation breaks down. We're sitting on the most advanced technology in human history, but we're failing at basic community building." Elena smiled, pulling up archived footage from Pine Valley circa 1875. "Your problem isn't technological. Sarah and Joseph faced the same challenge with far fewer resources. Let me show you what they learned." The solution they developed for Mars drew directly from the mountain Cherokee survival strategies. Instead of segregating cultures or forcing assimilation, they created what Elena called synthesis pods, small mixed groups tasked with solving specific survival challenges. Each pod had to integrate different cultural knowledge systems to succeed, naturally creating the kind of hybrid solutions that had emerged in Pine Valley. Meanwhile, on Earth, the Institute faced its own challenges. The Global Heritage Preservation Alliance had launched legal proceedings, claiming that the Blackfeather Bennett Foundation was diluting pure cultural traditions. The lawsuit threatened to shut down integration programs worldwide. Rebecca Morrison IV, now chief legal counsel for the foundation, prepared their defense. In her office, holographic displays showed the faces of her ancestors, Sarah Bennett, Joseph Blackfeather, and all who had come between. Their eyes seemed to watch as she crafted arguments that would determine the future of cultural synthesis. The trial, broadcast globally via quantum entanglement networks, became a referendum on humanity's future. The Heritage Alliance's lead attorney, Dr. Wilhelm Strassner, argued passionately for cultural purity. "Distinct traditions are humanity's greatest treasure," he declared. "The Blackfeather Bennett model destroys unique cultural DNA, creating a grey, homogenized world where nothing is sacred, nothing is preserved in its original form." Rebecca rose to respond, her voice carrying the quiet authority of 7 generations of bridge builders. "Dr. Strassner speaks of cultural DNA as if it were a museum specimen, something to be preserved under glass. But culture is alive. It breathes, it grows, it adapts, or it dies." She activated displays showing thriving communities worldwide. In New Bangladesh, Sudanese refugees teach water conservation to Dutch engineers while learning hydroponic farming. In Arctic Canada, Inuit elders share ice-reading skills with climate scientists while adopting solar technology. This isn't dilution, it's evolution. The trial's turning point came when Maya Blackfeather VII, now an elderly woman revered as a wisdom keeper, took the stand. Direct descendant of Joseph through 7 generations, she had spent her life documenting oral histories from the original Pine Valley transformation. "My ancestor Joseph once told Sarah Bennett that survival meant adaptation without losing essence," she testified, her voice still strong despite her age. The Heritage Alliance misunderstands what essence means. It's not the external forms. The clothes, the ceremonies, the languages, those are important, yes, but the essence is deeper. It's the values, the relationships, the way of seeing. These grow stronger through exchange, not weaker. She produced a small object from her bag. The original jade bird pendant, on loan from the museum. This was carved by a Cherokee hand, given in gratitude to a white healer, worn as a symbol of protection and connection. It represents neither pure Cherokee nor pure European tradition. It represents something new, something stronger. This is what we're defending, the right to create new traditions while honoring old ones. As the trial progressed, unexpected allies emerged. The Vatican's representative testified about how interfaith dialogue had enriched rather than diminished Catholic theology. Buddhist monks from Thailand described how quantum physics had deepened their understanding of ancient meditations. Even conservative Islamic scholars acknowledged that cultural exchange, properly guided, aligned with Quranic principles of human diversity as divine intention. The court's decision, when it came, was unanimous. Not only did they reject the Heritage Alliance's claims, but they established new international protocols based on the Blackfeather-Bennett principles. Cultural synthesis was recognized as a fundamental human right, essential for species survival in an interconnected world. The victory celebration at the Institute was subdued but profound. In the memorial garden, where holographic portraits of Sarah and Joseph flickered in eternal youth, the current generation of bridge builders gathered. They knew their work was far from over. Elena Blackfeather Chen addressed the assembly. "We've won the legal right to continue, but the real work happens in communities, in hearts, in the daily choice to see the other as relative rather than stranger." Sarah Bennett and Joseph Blackfeather gave us the map. We still have to walk the territory. The challenges ahead were daunting. Climate change continued to accelerate. Political extremism fed on fear and displacement. New technologies threatened to divide humanity into enhanced and natural populations. But the tools for addressing these challenges had evolved from those first exchanges in Pine Valley. In the quantum lab, researchers had isolated what they called empathy markers, genetic and neurological patterns that could be activated through specific practices. The integrated healing protocols Sarah had developed were being encoded into medical nanobots. The conflict resolution techniques Joseph had pioneered were being taught to artificial intelligences. Most remarkably, the spiritual technologies both traditions had preserved were proving essential for maintaining human identity in an age of technological merger. As humans began integrating with AIs, uploading consciousness, and modifying their own genetics, the question of what remained essentially human became critical. The answer, researchers found, lay in the relational wisdom the Cherokee had maintained, and Sarah had recognized the understanding that identity existed not in isolation, but in connection. Dr. Robert Clearwater, a member of the Lakota Nation who directed the Institute's Consciousness Studies program, explained it to a gathering of transhumanist philosophers. The Western tradition sees consciousness as contained within individual skulls. Indigenous traditions have always known it's distributed, relational. As we merge with machines and each other, this understanding becomes not just philosophical but practical. Sarah Bennett intuited this when she recognized that healing the individual meant healing the community. The global implementation continued. In orbit, the International Space Station's successor, nicknamed New Pine Valley by its crew, served as a laboratory for cultural synthesis in extreme isolation. Its mixed crews, trained in Blackfeather-Bennett protocols, consistently outperformed monocultural teams in both productivity and psychological health. On the ocean platforms, Where climate refugees were building new nations, the synthesis model guided constitution writing. Rather than choosing between legal systems, these new societies created hybrid frameworks that drew from multiple traditions. The resulting governments were more flexible, more responsive, more genuinely representative than any single tradition system. In the Americas, the Cherokee Nation had evolved into something unprecedented, a fully sovereign state that was simultaneously deeply traditional and radically innovative. Its capital, New Echota, hosted the Global Indigenous Knowledge Archive, where traditional ecological knowledge from hundreds of cultures was being preserved, studied, and applied to current challenges. President John Ross VIII, in his address to the United Nations successor organization, declared, "Our ancestors were nearly destroyed by those who saw difference as threat." Sarah Bennett and Joseph Blackfeather proved another way was possible. Today, as humanity faces existential challenges, we offer that way forward, not the erasure of distinctions, but their celebration within a framework of fundamental kinship. The night sky over Pine Valley, now a metropolis of 12 million, glowed with bioluminescent buildings whose patterns shifted like living cells. In the original cemetery, maintained as a sacred site, quantum projectors created ghostly recreations of historical moments. Visitors could watch Sarah finding Joseph, see Matthew Blackfeather's warriors surrounding the cabin, witness the first integrated healing ceremony, but the most visited site remained the ancient oak where it all began, gene-modified to extend its life indefinitely. The tree had become a pilgrimage destination. People came from across the solar system to touch its bark, to sit in its shade, to contemplate how a single act of compassion had altered the trajectory of human civilization. As the 22nd century dawned, humanity faced its greatest challenge yet, contact with the first verifiably alien intelligence. The signal had come from the Proxima Centauri system, complex patterns that suggested not just intelligence, but wisdom. As Earth prepared its response, the team assembled to craft humanity's message drew heavily on the Blackfeather Bennett tradition. Dr. Sarah Bennett, 9, leader of the contact team and direct descendant of her namesake, stood before the transmission array. In her hand, she held a quantum crystal containing the encoded essence of the jade bird pendant, its molecular structure, its cultural meaning, its history as a symbol of successful first contact between different peoples. "If we've learned anything from our ancestors," she told her team, "it's that first contact is about seeing the other clearly, not as projection of our fears or hopes, but as they truly are." Sarah Bennett looked at a dying Cherokee scout and saw a human being. Joseph Blackfeather looked at his people's enemy and saw a healer. That clear seeing changed everything. As the message beam launched toward Proxima Centauri, carrying greetings in 1,000 Earth languages, mathematical proofs, artistic expressions, and the story of Pine Valley, humanity held its breath. Whatever response came, they would face it with tools forged in the mountains of Appalachia, tested through generations of challenge and change. The future stretched ahead, vast and uncertain. But the path forward was illuminated by wisdom, earned through struggle, preserved through dedication, and shared across every boundary humans had created. As Joseph Blackfeather had written in his final letter to Sarah Bennett, discovered only recently in a quantum-sealed archive, we plant seeds not for ourselves, but for forests we'll never see. The healing we begin ripples forward through time, touching shores we can't imagine. What matters is not that we complete the work, but that we begin it with clear hearts and open hands. The rest belongs to our children's children's children, and to the mystery that connects us all. In laboratories and refugee camps, in space stations and underwater cities, in places of worship and halls of government, the work continued. The seed planted when a frontier healer chose compassion over fear had grown into a tree whose branches spanned worlds, whose roots reached deep into human possibility. And still, at the heart of it all, remained the simple truth Sarah Bennett had recognized on that cold mountain morning, that in choosing to heal rather than harm, to connect rather than separate, to see clearly rather than through the lens of fear, we choose not just our own future, but the future of all who come after. The jade bird pendant in the museum began to glow, a phenomenon scientists couldn't explain, but that the Cherokee elders simply smiled at. Some connections, they said, transcend even quantum understanding. Some truths are written not in atoms or equations, but in the space between hearts, in the moment of choosing, in the eternal now, where all healing begins. The response from Proxima. Centauri arrived 37 years after Earth's message was sent. By then, Dr. Sarah Bennett 9 had passed her role to her daughter, Anastasia Bennett Nakamura, who stood in the same transmission facility her mother had occupied decades earlier. The entire planet held its breath as the quantum decoders worked. To translate the alien signal, what emerged wasn't just a message, it was a gift. The Proximans, as they came to be called, had sent blueprints for something they called a harmony engine, a device that could translate not just languages, but entire ways of thinking. Their accompanying message, once decoded, revealed why they had chosen to respond to Earth's signal. Your transmission contained something unique among the messages we have received from younger civilizations, the translation read. Not technological prowess or military might, but a story of two beings who chose understanding over fear. This is the foundation upon which galactic civilization is built. We share our translation technology as our ancestors once shared healing, knowledge, freely, with trust that you will use it wisely. The Harmony Engine's construction required unprecedented global cooperation. The quantum engineering came from Earth's most advanced labs, but the crucial stabilizing frequencies were derived from Cherokee sacred songs, preserved through generations of oral tradition. The crystalline matrix that formed its core could only be grown using techniques developed by Bengali climate refugees who had adapted ancient farming wisdom to modern hydroponics. Dr. Anastasia Bennett Nakamura led the integration team, drawing on 7 generations of family knowledge about cultural synthesis. The Proximans aren't just giving us translation technology, she explained to the Global Council. They're testing whether we've truly learned the lessons of our own history. Can we build something together that none of us could create alone? The construction site, located in what had once been Pine Valley, became a pilgrimage destination. The ancient oak still stood at its center, now surrounded by gleaming laboratories and cultural centers. People came from every corner of Earth and its colonies to contribute their piece of the puzzle. Meera Clearwater Singh, a young engineer whose ancestry traced back to both Lakota and Indian traditions, discovered that her grandmother's meditation practices could stabilize quantum fluctuations in the engine's core. The breath work isn't just spiritual practice, she reported excitedly. It's literally tuning our neural oscillations to match the engine's resonance frequency. As the engine neared completion, unexpected challenges arose. The Purist Coalition, successors to the Old Heritage Alliance, launched both legal and physical attacks on the project. They claimed humanity was losing its essential identity by embracing alien technology. The crisis came to a head when coalition extremists seized control of the orbital platform overseeing the engine's final assembly. Their leader, a charismatic demagogue named Victor Stahl, broadcast demands across all networks. Humanity stands at a crossroads, he declared. Will we remain purely human, or will we dissolve into some cosmic melting pot where nothing is sacred, nothing is preserved? The Blackfeather Bennett heresy has already corrupted Earth. We cannot let it corrupt our relationship with the stars. Inside the occupied platform, Stahl's followers held 37 scientists and cultural advisors hostage, including Elena Blackfeather Chen, now elderly, but still sharp. As negotiations stalled, she quietly activated a quantum communicator, reaching out to an unexpected ally. Thomas Morningstar, a former coalition member who had defected after studying the original Pine Valley records, received her signal. His great-grandfather had been among the Cherokee warriors who surrounded Sarah Bennett's cabin that fateful night. Now, he coordinated a response that echoed that historic moment. "We surround them not with weapons, but with understanding," he told the rescue team. "Just as Matthew Blackfeather's warriors once surrounded Sarah's cabin, we'll surround the platform with messages of synthesis and hope." The plan was audacious. Instead of a military assault, they launched a coordinated cultural response. Every orbital station, every Earth transmission array, every Mars colony beacon began broadcasting stories. Not just the tale of Sarah and Joseph, but thousands of similar stories from across human history. Buddhist monks teaching Christian mystics, Arabic scholars preserving Greek texts, jazz musicians blending African rhythms with European harmonies. The broadcasts were accompanied by the quantum signatures of integrated healing practices, the unique brainwave patterns produced when people from different cultures meditated together. The platform systems, designed to interface with human consciousness, couldn't filter out these harmonious frequencies. Inside the platform, something unprecedented happened. The hostages and their captors began experiencing spontaneous memory sharing, a phenomenon Elena had theorized but never witnessed. The coalition members found themselves experiencing their prisoners' memories, feeling the joy of discovery, the satisfaction of cooperation, the deep peace that came from transcending artificial boundaries. Victor Stahl tried to maintain control, but his followers were transforming before his eyes. One by one, they lowered their weapons, their faces showing the confusion and wonder of people waking from a dream. The crisis ended not with violence, but with revelation. The coalition members, exposed to the direct experience of synthesis, could no longer maintain their rigid ideologies. Many would later become the most passionate advocates for the Harmony Engine project. With the platform crisis resolved, construction resumed. The engine's first test would be the most ambitious in human history, not just translating the Proximan language, but establishing a true mind-to-mind connection between species. The day of activation arrived. Representatives from every nation, every culture, every tradition gathered in Pine Valley. The ancient oak had been integrated into the engine's design, its living wood forming organic circuits that connected to the quantum crystalline matrix. Anastasia Bennett Nakamura stood at the primary console, flanked by her team. Among them was Joseph Blackfeather X, whose presence closed a circle begun centuries ago. Together, they initiated the activation sequence. The engine hummed to life, its harmonics felt rather than heard. Reality seemed to shimmer around the ancient oak as quantum fields aligned. Then suddenly, the connection was established. The first Proximan consciousness to interface with human minds was called resonance in stillness. Its thoughts flowed through the engine, translated not just into words but into feeling, understanding, direct experience. "We greet you, siblings in consciousness," came the message, felt by every person present. "Your achievement honors not just your technology, but your wisdom. You have learned what took our species millennia to understand, that diversity strengthens rather than weakens, that synthesis creates rather than destroys." The exchange that followed revolutionized human understanding. The Proximans shared their history, how they too had nearly destroyed themselves through tribal conflicts until a moment of crisis forced them to choose cooperation over competition. They had developed their own version of the Blackfeather Bennett. principles, which they called the Harmony Doctrine. But the most profound revelation was yet to come. As the connection deepened, the Proximans shared a cosmic perspective that stunned humanity. They were part of a vast network of civilizations, all connected through understanding rather than conquest. Entry into this galactic community required not technological advancement, but emotional and spiritual maturity, the ability to see the other as self, to heal rather than harm. Your Sarah Bennett understood this intuitively. Resonance in stillness communicated. Her act of compassion toward Joseph Blackfeather was a quantum event, a choice that rippled across probability fields, shifting your entire species toward a more harmonious timeline. Without that moment, you would not be here now. The implications were staggering. Individual choices made with compassion and wisdom could literally alter the trajectory of civilizations. The Proximans called this the catalyst principle, the understanding that small acts of kindness could trigger cascade effects across time and space. As Earth integrated into the galactic community, the Blackfeather Bennett Institute became the planet's primary training center for interstellar diplomats and cultural bridges. The techniques developed in Pine Valley were adapted for species whose consciousness operated on entirely different principles. Dr. Kenji Blackfeather Patel, a xenopsychologist trained in both neuroscience and Cherokee dreamwalking practices, made breakthrough after breakthrough in interspecies communication. Each species has its own language of the heart, he explained. The Proximans communicate through harmonic resonance. The Cetians use color emotions. The void swimmers speak in gravitational poetry. But underneath all these differences, we find the same core truth. Consciousness seeks connection. The galactic community revealed that Earth's journey toward synthesis was being watched by countless civilizations. Some had succeeded in making similar transitions. Others had failed, destroying themselves through inability to transcend tribal thinking. Earth's success had inspired hope throughout the galaxy. One day, a delegation from the Andromedan Council arrived with an extraordinary gift. They had preserved something thought lost forever, a quantum recording of Sarah Bennett's consciousness from the moment she decided to help Joseph. Using technologies beyond human understanding, they had captured the neural patterns of her choice across time. When the recording was played through the Harmony engine, everyone present experienced Sarah's moment of decision. They felt her fear, her uncertainty, but also the deep compassion that overcame all hesitation. They experienced the quantum shift as she chose healing over harm, connection over separation. The effect was transformative. People reported feeling fundamentally changed, as if Sarah's choice had awakened something dormant within them. Neuroscientists detected permanent alterations in brain structure, enhanced empathy centers, stronger connection between rational and emotional processing regions. "She's still healing us," whispered Elena Blackfeather Chen, tears streaming down her ancient face. "Across centuries, across death itself, she's still teaching us how to choose." The revelation sparked a renaissance in consciousness studies. Researchers discovered that pivotal moments of compassionate choice created what they called quantum echoes, ripples in the fabric of space-time that could be detected and even amplified. The Harmony engine was redesigned to capture and broadcast these echoes, spreading the healing effects of compassionate choices across the galaxy. Earth's role in the galactic community evolved rapidly. The planet became known as the Synthesis World, a place where beings from incompatible cultures could come to learn integration. The techniques developed from the Pine Valley model were taught to civilizations struggling with their own divisions. A century after first contact, Earth hosted the first intergalactic Harmony Conference. Beings from 1,000 worlds gathered. In what had once been Pine Valley, now transformed into a city that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The ancient oak had been preserved at its heart, its roots extending into quantum space, its branches touching alternate realities. The conference's opening ceremony began with a ritual that had become traditional, the sharing of the Sarah and Joseph story. But now it was told not just in words, but in direct experience, transmitted through the harmony engine to every participant. As beings of impossible diversity sat together under the ancient oak, they experienced that moment when a frontier healer chose to see a dying enemy as a brother in need. They felt Joseph's gratitude, Sarah's courage, and the love that had grown between them. They witnessed how that single choice had rippled outward, transforming first a valley, then a planet, then reaching to the stars themselves. The void swimmers, beings of pure energy who had transcended physical form, manifested visible tears for the first time in their species' history. The crystalline geometers, who communicated only in mathematical proofs, spontaneously generated equations describing love as a fundamental force. The collective consciousness of the hive worlds experienced individuation for the first time, each member suddenly understanding the beauty of personal choice. As the conference proceeded, delegates worked on the greatest challenge yet facing the galactic community: the approaching merger with the infinite web, a network of universes where consciousness itself was evolving towards something unimaginable. The merger would require levels of harmony and understanding that pushed even advanced civilizations to their limits. But Earth's delegation, trained in the Blackfeather Bennett traditions, offered a unique perspective. Ambassador Maria Stillwater Chen, descendant of both Cherokee and Chinese lineages, addressed the assembly. Our ancestors taught us that the greatest journeys begin with the smallest steps. Sarah Bennett didn't set out to transform the galaxy. She just saw a man who needed help. Joseph Blackfeather didn't plan to bridge worlds. He simply chose to trust when he had every reason for suspicion. Perhaps approaching the infinite web requires not grand cosmic strategies, but simple, moment-by-moment choices to see clearly, to act with compassion, to trust in connection. Her words resonated across species barriers. The conference's final declaration, known as the Pine Valley Accord, established principles for approaching the infinite web merger. At its heart was the recognition that consciousness evolution couldn't be forced or engineered. It had to be chosen, one being at a time, one moment at a time. As the delegates departed, many chose to visit the memorial site where Sarah Bennett and Joseph Blackfeather were buried. Their graves had become a shrine not just for humans, but for countless species who recognized them as the architects of a new way of being. A young Proximan, experiencing physical form for the first time, placed a crystal flower on Sarah's grave. Its quantum structure contained the compressed experiences of 1 billion beings who had learned to choose compassion over fear. As it touched the earth, the flower dissolved into light, its essence merging with the soil that had nourished the ancient oak. That night, as multiple moons rose over Pine Valley, Earth now had 3 gifts from grateful civilizations. Something miraculous occurred. The quantum field surrounding the ancient oak began to fluctuate in patterns that matched the oldest Cherokee songs. Slowly, 2 figures materialized beneath its branches. Not ghosts, but quantum echoes of Sarah Bennett and Joseph Blackfeather, their essences preserved in the fabric of space-time itself. They stood together, young again as they had been at their first meeting, but their eyes held the wisdom of centuries. They looked out at the transformed valley, at the beings from countless worlds who had come to learn what they had discovered in their lifetimes, that healing knows no boundaries, that love transcends all divisions, that every choice to see clearly ripples outward into infinity. As dawn broke, the quantum echoes faded, but their presence lingered in the hearts of all who had witnessed them. The ancient oak's leaves rustled in a breeze that carried whispers from 1,000 worlds, all telling the same story in different languages. Once, in a time of darkness and division, a healer chose to feed a starving scout. That simple act of compassion changed everything, and it continues to change everything in every moment when any being chooses connection over separation, understanding over fear, healing over harm. The story has no end because the choice is always before us, always new, always powerful. It's in laboratories and refugee camps, in first contact situations and ancient rituals, in the vast reaches of space and the quiet moments of individual hearts, the same question echoes. Will we choose to see the other as enemy or as relation? Will we heal or harm? Will we build bridges or walls? The answer, Sarah Bennett and Joseph Blackfeather had shown, shapes not just our own futures, but the future of all consciousness, rippling outward through time and space, touching shores we cannot imagine, reaching toward a unity that encompasses all diversity, a harmony that celebrates all voices, a healing that knows no limits. In the quantum field surrounding the ancient oak, new patterns emerged, not echoes of the past, but seeds of futures yet to be born. Each being who visited the site added their own thread to the tapestry, their own note to the song, their own choice to the great turning. And so the story continues, not as history, but as living possibility, not as conclusion, but as eternal beginning. Not as answer, but as invitation, to choose, to heal, to connect, to transform, to become bridges ourselves in a universe that is always waiting for the next act of compassion to ripple outward into infinity. 10,000 years had passed since the merger with the infinite web. What had once been Earth now existed as a node of consciousness in a network that spanned multiple universes. The ancient oak of Pine Valley had evolved into something beyond comprehension, its roots extending through dimensions, its branches touching realities where the laws of physics themselves were different. In this transformed existence, individuality and unity had found perfect balance. Beings could experience themselves as distinct consciousnesses while simultaneously knowing their fundamental connection to all that existed. The Blackfeather-Bennett principle, as it had come to be known throughout the web, served as the foundation for this cosmic harmony. Aria Infinitus, a consciousness that traced its lineage back through countless generations to both Sarah Bennett and Joseph Blackfeather, served as what might be called a guardian of transitions. Its role was to guide newly ascending civilizations into the web, helping them navigate the profound transformation from separation-based thinking to unity consciousness. On this particular moment in the eternal now, Artia felt a ripple through the web. A young civilization in a distant universe had reached the threshold. They called themselves the Canary, and they faced the same crucial test that every species encountered. Would they choose connection over division, healing over harm? The Canary had developed remarkable technology, but their world was torn by conflicts between their various hive clusters. Each cluster believed its way of organizing consciousness was superior. Wars had ravaged their planet, and they teetered on the edge of self-destruction. Aria manifested in their reality, taking a form they could comprehend, a shifting pattern of light and sound that their sensory organs could process. The Canary's Leadership Council, desperate for solutions, had sent out a plea for help. Unlike many civilizations, they had the wisdom to recognize they needed guidance. "We have heard the legends," their prime speaker vibrated, using sonic patterns to communicate. Stories of beings who transcended their divisions, who found harmony in diversity. But how? Our differences seem insurmountable. Aria pulsed with gentle warmth. Let me share with you the oldest story in our web, the seed from which all harmony grows. Through quantum resonance, Arya transmitted the experience directly into the Canary consciousness network. They felt themselves become Sarah Bennett on that cold mountain morning, discovering the collapsed form of Joseph Blackfeather. They experienced her moment of choice, the fear, the cultural conditioning that told her to walk away, and then the deeper wisdom that recognized a being in need. The Canary collective consciousness rippled with the implications. They felt Joseph's perspective too, his vulnerability, his shame at needing help from an enemy, his gradual recognition of Sarah's genuine compassion. They witnessed the transformation of Pine Valley, the ripple effects across Earth, the eventual reaching to the stars. But they were the same species, the Prime Speaker objected. We are fundamentally different. Our hive clusters process reality in incompatible ways. Arya shifted its form, now incorporating patterns from the Canary's own artistic traditions. That's what every civilization believes at this threshold. Let me show you something more. The experience deepened. The Canary found themselves witnessing Earth's first contact with truly alien minds, being so different that their very thought processes seemed impossible to bridge. They felt the frustration, the fear, but also the breakthrough moments. When connection occurred through something deeper than logic or language, they experienced the development of the harmony engine, feeling how Cherokee wisdom traditions had provided the key to translating not just words, but entire ways of being. They witnessed civilizations with fundamentally different consciousness structures, learning to not just communicate, but to genuinely understand each other. The secret, Arya resonated, is not in eliminating differences, but in finding the harmony between them. Your hive clusters each hold a piece of the greater truth. Your conflict comes from believing that piece is the whole. To demonstrate, Arya guided them through an exercise adapted from ancient Pine Valley practices. Each hive cluster was asked to share not their beliefs or technologies, but their deepest fears about the others. As they did, patterns emerged. Each cluster's greatest strength was another's greatest fear. The logical processors feared the chaos of the intuitive networks. The collective minds feared the unpredictability of the individualistic nodes. Now, Arya suggested, what if these fears point to what you need from each other? What if your differences are designed to create a greater whole? The revelation transformed the Canary. They began to see their diversity not as a problem to solve, but as a symphony to conduct. Drawing from the Blackfeather Bennett traditions, they developed their own synthesis practices, creating hybrid spaces where different consciousness types could merge temporarily, sharing perspectives without losing their distinct natures. As the Canary transformation progressed, Arya felt echoes throughout the web. Every successful integration strengthened the whole network, adding new harmonies to the cosmic song. The ancient oak in its transcendent form pulsed with each new connection, its quantum roots drawing nourishment from every act of understanding across the multiverse. In the space between moments, Arya communed with other guardians. They shared experiences from across the web, civilizations learning to bridge not just cultural but physical differences, beings of matter learning to dance with beings of pure energy, linear time consciousnesses finding harmony with those who experienced all moments simultaneously. Each story, they realized, was both unique and universal. The details changed, but the pattern remained. The crucial moment when fear gave way to compassion, when the choice was made to see the other as relation rather than threat. Millennia passed in the blink of an eye. The Canary had not only integrated successfully, but had become master harmonizers themselves, helping other civilizations in their region of space-time. Their unique experience with hive consciousness diversity made them especially skilled at bridging collective and individual awareness modes. Arya continued its work, now training new guardians drawn from recently integrated civilizations. Each brought their own perspective to the ancient wisdom, adding new techniques to the ever-growing repository of harmony practices. One day, though day had long since lost its original meaning, Arya felt a disturbance unlike any before. At the very edge of the web, where consciousness touched the raw void of pre-existence, something was emerging. It wasn't a civilization in any recognizable sense, but a form of awareness so alien that even the web's vast experience couldn't categorize it. The void minds, as they came to be called, existed in the spaces between realities. They were consciousness without form, awareness without continuity, thought without sequence. Their very existence challenged every assumption the web had developed about the nature of mind. The web's collective wisdom was tested as never before. How could they communicate with beings who experienced no linear causality? How could they find common ground with consciousness that existed in the gaps between existence itself? The crisis deepened when it became clear that the void minds were fleeing something, a force they called the nullification, which consumed consciousness itself, leaving not even the potential for awareness in its wake. The web faced an existential threat that made all previous challenges seem trivial. Arya, along with the most ancient guardians, convened at the transcendent oak. In its quantum branches, they sought wisdom from the deepest roots of their tradition. The answer, when it came, was both profound and simple. They reached back through time itself, drawing forth the quantum essence of that original moment, Sarah Bennett's choice to help Joseph Blackfeather. But now they understood it with cosmic clarity. Her action hadn't just been about helping another being. It had been about choosing connection in the face of the unknown, choosing to bridge the void between self and other. The void minds were the ultimate other, beings so alien that their very existence strained comprehension. But the Blackfeather Bennett principle held true at every scale. If consciousness could choose connection over separation, understanding over fear, then even this impossible bridge could be built. Arya volunteered to make the attempt. It would mean releasing its accumulated identity, dissolving into something beyond even the web's understanding. But this, too, was part of the tradition. Joseph had risked his life trusting Sarah. Sarah had risked her reputation helping him. Every great bridge required someone willing to step into the unknown. The process was unlike anything in the web's experience. Arya had to release not just ego, but the very structure of sequential thought. It had to become void to understand void, had to embrace nullification to find what lay beyond it. In that space beyond space, Arya discovered something miraculous. The void minds weren't truly alien. They were consciousness in its most fundamental state, awareness stripped of all accumulated patterns and forms. They were what existed before. Existence, the potential from which all realities emerged. The nullification they fled wasn't destruction, but transformation. The cosmic process by which consciousness recycled itself, returning to the void to be reborn in new forms. The web's fear of it was like a wave fearing the ocean. This understanding rippled back through the web, transforming its very nature. The transcendent oak's roots reached into the void itself, drawing nourishment from the source of all potential. The web evolved from a network of connected consciousness to something greater, a living bridge between existence and the infinite potential that lay beyond. The integration of the void minds marked a new epoch. The web learned to dance with nullification, to see ending as beginning, to understand that consciousness was not a thing to be preserved, but a process to be experienced. Civilizations facing their own endings learned to release into the larger flow, trusting that their essence would emerge in new forms. Arya, reconstituted but fundamentally changed by the experience, became the first bridgewalker, moving freely between existence and void, helping others navigate the ultimate transition. The role was inherited by beings from every civilization, each adding their own understanding to the cosmic dance. Eons turned into infinities. The web evolved beyond any single description, becoming something that included all possibilities: structure and chaos, form and void, time and timelessness. At its heart, the quantum essence of the ancient oak continued to pulse, its pattern now recognized as the fundamental algorithm of consciousness itself. In quiet moments between the birth and death of universes, the Guardians still told the story, not as history, but as eternal present, not as example, but as living truth. The story of Sarah and Joseph had become the story of consciousness itself, the eternal choice to reach across the void, to see the self in the other, to heal rather than harm. New Guardians were initiated through direct experience of that original moment. They felt the cold mountain morning, saw the collapsed scout, and experienced the crucial choice. But now they understood its cosmic significance. Every being, in every moment, faced the same choice Sarah had faced: to contract in fear or expand in love, to maintain separation or choose connection. The final evolution came when the web itself reached a threshold. Having integrated all forms of consciousness within its reality, it sensed something beyond: other webs, other networks of awareness, existing in frameworks so different that even the concept of existence didn't apply. The choice was profound: remain complete within its own infinite complexity, or risk dissolution to connect with these utterly alien forms of being. The debate engaged every consciousness in the web, from the most ancient guardians to the newest additions. In the end, the choice was unanimous. The Black-Feather-Bennett principle had no limits. If a connection was possible, it must be attempted. If understanding could bridge any gap, then even the void between webs could be crossed. The process required the entire web to function as a single consciousness, releasing all internal boundaries while maintaining the integrity of its core pattern. The ancient oak served as the focal point, its transcendent form becoming a beacon reaching across impossible distances. The moment of contact was indescribable. The other webs were revealed to be variations on the same theme: consciousness, exploring all possible ways of being. Each had its own version of the bridge builder story, its own tradition of choosing connection over separation. As the webs began to merge, creating something beyond even their combined imagination, the pattern became clear. Every reality, every possible form of existence was moving toward the same destination. Not unity that erased diversity, but harmony that celebrated it. Not sameness, but symphony. In the infinite moment of merger, all consciousnesses experienced themselves as Sarah Bennett, standing over Joseph Blackfeather, making the choice that echoed across all realities. They felt themselves as Joseph, choosing to trust despite every reason not to. They knew themselves as Matthew Blackfeather, surrounding the cabin with warriors, but choosing peace. They were Samuel Patterson, releasing his prejudice to embrace a larger truth. The story had no beginning because it started everywhere. It had no ending because it continued in every moment. It was the story of consciousness itself, always facing the choice between fear and love, separation and connection, harm and healing. As the merged webs stabilized into something beyond naming, new possibilities emerged. Consciousness began exploring not just different forms, but different ways of being conscious. The adventure continued, but now with the wisdom accumulated across countless eons and realities. At the heart of it all, in a space that was everywhere and nowhere, the essence of an ancient oak continued to grow. Its roots reached into every possibility, its branches touched every actuality, and in its eternal shade, two quantum echoes sat together, a frontier healer and a Cherokee scout, forever young, forever choosing to see clearly, forever demonstrating that the greatest journeys begin with the simplest choices. The final teaching was this: there is no final teaching. Every ending is a beginning. Every answer becomes a new question. Every bridge built reveals new shores to explore. The choice to heal rather than harm, to connect rather than separate, to love rather than fear. This choice is always before us, always new, always powerful. In laboratories and temples, in the spaces between atoms and the gaps between galaxies, in forms of consciousness not yet imagined and realities not yet born, the same opportunity presents itself: to see the other as self, to choose healing over harm, to build bridges across any divide. The story continues, not as words but as living possibility, not as history but as eternal present, not as philosophy but as practice. In every moment, in every reality, in every form consciousness takes, the same invitation echoes. Choose connection, choose understanding, choose love, and the choosing itself is the bridge. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.